With Russia being the second largest oil exporter in the world, how could the conflict between Russia and Ukraine affect our crude supply? That big question and more with One News Chief Correspondent Ed Lingao. Ed, welcome to the big story.
Hi, Robbie. Good evening.
Now, Ed, obviously, this is not the first time we've seen external shocks, crisis elsewhere in the world affecting oil supplies. Can we reference any past experiences and what we did in the past?
Okay, the first was in 1973 when OPEC countries imposed an oil embargo against Israel and Israeli allied states in the wake of the Yom Kippur War in 1973. At kasama tayo doon sa allied states. And that lasted until March 1974. And we saw a tripling of oil prices in the world from $3, can you imagine, it's only $3 then per barrel, to $12 per barrel. That sparked a host of diplomatic initiatives by the palace to woo OPEC countries. And at the same time, the Philippines started encouraging Filipinos to start traveling abroad and working abroad to bring in dollars to boost the dollar reserves and enable us to buy more oil. And that's now the precursor of today's overseas Filipino worker, OFWs. Then there was, of course, the first Gulf War with Saddam Hussein when he invaded Kuwait in 1990 going to 1991. That also caused a dramatic increase in oil prices. Pero at that time kasi meron pang oil price stabilization fund which helped to cushion it kahit papano. So that in a way helped to delay or defer the increases then. Ito yung mga major shocks that we had.
Yeah, well, you mentioned the oil price stabilization fund. Every time may ganito, syempre napupunta rin sa usapin na can we regulate prices? Has that ever worked?
Well, in theory, it would work in theory. That the idea being it is a buffer fund where the oil companies would contribute so long as world prices go below a certain benchmark, and then maglalabas naman ng pera yung OPSF kung lumagpas dun sa benchmark yun. So parang give and take yun. But unfortunately, kasi in the Philippine context, it has always been a political issue when it comes to deciding on oil prices. So if you do recall, in the late 80s and the early 1990s, parating welgang bayan yan tuwing gumagalaw yung oil prices. And so as a consequence, government tried or would always defer any adjustment in the prices, and the result being the buildup of a deficit in the OPSF. So, in other words, napasa yung utang ng OPSF dun sa ordinary taxpayers. And so that didn't help. So that was why we had an oil deregulation law in the mid-1990s for government to just simply let go of oil pricing.
Okay, maraming salamat, Bok. That was Ed Lingao, One News Chief Correspondent.